Hello, everyone. Hope you guys are having a good day or a good evening, depending on where you are on the globe. Uh, Today, I have been kind of stuck as to what I want to talk about. I try to do at least one video for you guys each day, but today I have been kind of stuck, kind of blank, because I spent a huge chunk of my day grocery shopping. And if that sounds kind of crazy, it's not. And the reason why is because I don't really go out to eat a lot, and I do spend most of my time at home. Um, and so I cook a lot. So I kind of function like an in-house chef, and my house is kind of like my restaurant. And well, if you look at how restaurants shop for their produce and their meats and their ingredients, they buy a lot of stuff. So anyway, kind of blank today. I could talk about what's been going on in the news, but what am I going to say that I haven't really said already? Um, I did do some searching on my iPhone while I was out for newsworthy articles or things that would interest me as far as current events goes. And I found an article about Poland and Lithuania uh, wanting to enact Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or as we all know it, NATO. And I thought that was definitely interesting. For those of you who don't know, Article 4 is basically it's a part of the NATO alliance that, if enacted, it calls for consultation over military matters when, and I have the quote in front of me, the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of a NATO member is in danger. And there has been a lot of talk lately about a possible escalation to violence between Poland and Belarus. And if that were to happen, it would be basically a proxy war between NATO and Russia, because Belarus is a puppet state for Russia, and as we all know, Poland is a member of NATO. Now, if that were to happen, what would be the end result? How would the situation unravel itself? How would it flesh itself out? Well, the way I look at it is that if such a thing were to occur, it would more than likely end up like what took place between Austria and Serbia before World War I became World War I. World War I began as merely a war between Serbia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, because the Austrian Archduke Ferdinand was shot. His wife was shot. They were both murdered by some crazy nationalist in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so the Austrians blamed the Serbian government, saying, hey, you guys didn't really do anything to protect the Archduke. There was even a lot of talk in those days saying that it was part of some kind of psyop, or it was a part of some kind of conspiracy on the part of the Serbian government. But anyway, the Austrians went to war with Serbia, and the goal was to destroy Serbia. That's what the Austrians wanted to do. And the Germans were behind the curtains, basically pulling the strings and saying, yeah, it's going to begin as just a mere conflict between Austria and the Serbs, but we are going to use the conflict in order to accelerate the situation into a war between the Germans and the British, and the Germans and the French, and ultimately between the Germans and the Russians. And there was some kind of goal. I don't remember every detail of it, but there was some kind of a scheme that the Germans had, basically saying, okay, we're going to start a war with the French, or we're going to start a war with, the French, and that would ultimately pull in the Russians, because the Russians and the French had some sort of treaty basically saying that if either one of them were ever invaded or attacked, one would defend the other, kind of like a NATO alliance. And so if there is a war between Poland and Belarus, and let's say Russia intervenes, then what's going to happen? Germany will ultimately intervene, and you could end up with another major European conflict, which would escalate, I think, into a global conflict. Is this going to happen in the next 48 hours? No. But I think something like this could very well happen. It's very possible. Now, I began this video by saying I'm not going to talk about politics, or I'm blank, or I don't want to say something that I've already said, but I have already said it. Now, what does that lead me to? Well, it leads me to talking about something that I have actually wanted to talk about, and that is Resident Evil 8. If you have not played Resident Evil 8 and you do play video games and you have a video game console or you play games on your PC, I would highly recommend that you play Resident Evil 8 if you have not already, because Resident Evil 8 is an awesome video game. It felt almost like watching a movie. I loved this game. This is probably my favorite Resident Evil game after Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil Revelations 2, which was an awesome Resident Evil game regardless of how many people trashed on it. I thought it was an awesome game. I really have enjoyed all of the Resident Evil games. I have not played Resident Evil 1 nor Resident Evil 0 yet, but I bought those two games and they are definitely on my to-do list. But I have played 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and I've also played Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2, and I've also played Resident Evil Raccoon City, and I have thoroughly enjoyed all of them. I love the Resident Evil universe. I'm not really a huge zombie fan when it comes to film. Like if there's a movie about zombies, I'm not too crazy about it. Probably the best zombie film that I've watched is World War Z with, I think it had Brad Pitt in it. I thought that was a good film, but I have not enjoyed the Resident Evil films. I think they have done a big disservice to the actual universe, although I do have some hope for the Resident Evil movie that's about to come out this month, and I hope that it's good. It looks good. By looking at the trailer, it looks like they're trying to stay honorable to the actual story. But I watched Train to Busan, which is a Korean zombie film. Didn't really enjoy it. There's something about zombies, like just watching a movie where the bad guys are, it's really not that interesting. It's not really an interesting story. And the earlier Resident Evil games, when there's the screen was all pixely. I'm not talking about the modern or the latest Resident Evil games, but when you look at the earliest Resident Evil games from the 90s, they did not look interesting. They really didn't. But Resident Evil 4 came out in 2005. I was a freshman in high school at the time, and I thought that it was the greatest game ever, and it still is one of the greatest games ever made. And the reason why Resident Evil 5 was so good, or really, I should say, one of the main reasons why Resident Evil 4 was so good, was because the zombies were not conventional zombies. They weren't. They were zombies that could talk, and they could communicate, and they could plan, and they could organize, and they could also worship. This is what I found so fascinating. They could worship. In Resident Evil 4, the zombies worship. They worship Lord Sadler, the leader of the cult that they are all members of. In the story of Resident Evil 4, basically you play this character named Leon Kennedy, and you're out to rescue the president's daughter. And I know that sounds really corny because you're just one guy with a 9mm pistol out to rescue the daughter of the president of the United States. But regardless of that, the idea of going into a village or into this whole region in Spain that's controlled by a cult who worships this one man named Lord Sadler, and they believe that he is basically this holy man, and you're fighting against the cult. I think that's really fascinating, because the idea of fighting against cults has been a huge passion of mine since since I was in high school, maybe even earlier than that, because when I was in junior high, I was reading up on political issues and things like that, and I saw the left as a crazy ass group. As I got older, I began to have a better understanding of cults and how they work. And really, one of the things, this is going to sound so crazy to some people, but one of my experiences, one of my personal experiences that has actually truly helped me better understand the nature of cults has been my experience in the Catholic Church. Not saying the Catholic Church is a cult, but what I will say is that there are definitely elements within the Catholic Church, or there are movements within the Catholic Church that are definitely cultic. And when I was in Italy, I stayed in this small village, and I stayed with I stayed inside this dormitory that was owned by a monastery. It was right next to a monastery. And I know for a fact that at least one of the people in this monastery, the head nun, was a witch. Her name was Sister Maria Gloria Riva, and she was a witch. And I know for a fact that I know for a fact that she was a witch, and it's very possible that there are other witches that are a part of this group. But this woman was well connected. She was well connected with people in the Vatican. And being in that village kind of reminded me of Resident Evil 4. And what made Resident Evil 4 so great was the idea of fighting a cult that is portrayed as purely evil. It's portrayed as not only purely evil, but that evil is illustrated through grotesque imagery. The people who are in this cult look horrifying. The zombies look horrifying. When they talk, they sound horrifying. When you're in the middle, and probably the scariest part of the game, or one of the scariest parts of the game, I would say probably the scariest part of the game after dealing with the generators or the regenerators, is when you're in the village at night and you really can't see anything, and it's raining and it's thundering, and all of a sudden you hear, "Hey, stop!" It is so, like, at that age, playing the game, it was a little bit nerve-wracking, I will admit. But it portrays it as grotesque. Many times, most of the time, cults portray themselves as clean-cut and as righteous people. Purely righteous people. This is hot chocolate, by the way. Purely righteous people. If you look at the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, trad Catholics who are Nazi sympathizers, one thing that these groups all have in common is that they portray themselves as clean cut. Nazis will do this. Alt-right guys will do this. They all, even Muslims will do this. And I know Muslims are usually portrayed as being dirty or kind of scraggly and shabby looking. But for the most part, Muslims are very clean people. But then you see the ugliness, right? You see the ugly side. You see the Nazi sympathy, the open Nazi sympathy. You will also see in the past certain Catholics, specifically people who were members of the Croatian Ustashi, or people who were members of the I forgot the name of this group, but they were a group of Wallonian Nazis in Belgium who wanted to, I think, revive monarchy. They were Nazi monarchists in Wallonia. And these guys portrayed themselves as being very pious, very clean. But then you see the ugliness. You see the atrocities. You see, in the cases of many priests in the Catholic Church, you see molestation. You see sexual predatory behavior, I should say. You see mass beheadings. This is one thing I find so crazy about all of the fandom surrounding Khabib. I can't say his last name. Khabib Nurmagomedov, I think his last name is. This guy he was a UFC fighter. He is a UFC champion who beat up everyone that he fought in his division in the UFC, got the belt, became the world champion, and then he retired. He is from Dagestan. I think he still lives in Dagestan, but he's a very pious Muslim man, this Khabib guy. And a lot of people watched Khabib and they admired his piety. And I myself looked at Khabib in his life and say, wow, that guy, yeah, like he really lives his beliefs and you can't take that away from him. But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that the Muslim fundamentalists of the North Caucasus, that's where Khabib is from. The North Caucasus is basically where you have Dagestan, Chechnya, Ingushetia, and some other regions I don't remember. But most of the people who live in the North Caucasus are Muslim. And let's not forget, and let's pretend that this doesn't exist. Let's not pretend that this, does not exist. That in the North Caucasus, there are some pretty horrible people. And I have seen horrifying footage from the North Caucasus. And from the South Caucasus recently, if you want to talk about the war between the Armenians and the Azeris over Nagorno-Karabakh. But there was a video I remember watching years ago, and I will not watch it. It's horrifying. And it was from Dagestan, the country that Khabib is from, the region that Khabib is from, because Dagestan is still a part of Russia. And in this video, you see Russian soldiers slowly being sliced up by knives and having their throats slit by these Dagestani Muslim terrorists. And these Muslim terrorists are laughing and giggling sadistically as they slowly murder these Russian soldiers. And these Russian soldiers are crying and weeping. It's horrifying, okay? It's one of the most horrifying things that I've ever seen. And I would not doubt for a second that the people in that video, I shouldn't call them people, the absolutely diabolical murderers in that video, there's no doubt that they are family people. I have no doubt that these people were people who were dedicated to their families. They were dedicated to their children. They were good fathers. Because Muslim people, and this may sound like an insult, but it's not. Muslim people can be very good fathers. In fact, I would argue that people in the Islamic world are probably, for the most part, better parents than parents in the West. Just going to make that cold-cut affirmation right there. But and you may look at that and say, wow, look, clean, pious, all these things. But then there's the ugliness. The cleanliness is used as a way to masquerade the ugliness. And one thing that I like about film and video games is that you see what is called hyper-realism. I think this is the correct application of the term, hyper-realism. So basically seeing something that's real, but in its most grotesque way. And it's an artistic way to convey a point. To convey a point that what we are actually looking at truly is ugliness. So Resident Evil 4, Leon Kennedy fights against a gang of zombies who are actually a part of a cult, and they use their zombie strength to their advantage, and they want everyone to become a zombie. Well, that's basically what a cult does. A cult wants everyone to become a zombie. Because when you look at cults and you look at the evils that they can commit, and you talk to people and say, hey, this is wrong. You talk to the members of the cult and say, hey, this is wrong. And no matter what you present to them, you could present to them this is going to sound horrible, but you could present to them someone being raped. Someone being raped, and they would still try to justify the action, or they'll still try to downplay its reality, its ugliness, right? They'll try to downplay it all. And that, to me, is the definition of a zombie. Those people are zombies. And it doesn't have to be a cult that assembles together in a place of worship once a week or twice a week. It could be a movement that revolves around a particular ideologue or influencer, to use a modern-day term, a very recent term, I should say. For example, Milo Yiannopoulos, perfect example. For I don't know how many years, maybe like 2, 3 years, Milo Yiannopoulos was like a cult leader. People revered him. Conservatives absolutely exalted him. They adored him. They said, oh, he's so great. He's going to fight against the left or whatever. But then video came out. 2 videos came out showing Milo Yiannopoulos defending pederasty, defending predatorial behavior. And there were people who defended him. And they are still people who defend him. To this day, those people are zombies. Those people are zombies. And what I can find in a video game is a hyper-realistic depiction of those people. Yes, those people are not coming around going, hey, star! But at the same time, while they may present themselves as being clean or while they function as normal human beings, at the same time, there is this element within them, or there is an aspect to their personality that is just as ugly as the zombies that you see in a video game, if not more ugly, because it's actually real. Now, in Resident Evil 8, you fight against zombies, but you fight against zombies that are werewolves. In the original Resident Evils, it's a virus that makes people into zombies. But in the later Resident Evils, it becomes a parasite, right? So in Resident Evil 4, it's a parasite called Las Plagas, the plague. And once the parasite infects you, it makes you into this bloodlustful, rageful maniac who cannot be controlled only by this cult leader who has, I guess, like the main parasite or something like that. But in Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8, it's not a virus, it's not a parasite, it's a mold. And the mold is much more intelligent than the virus and the parasite. The mold, once it infects you, it will take control of your consciousness and it makes you into a crazy, violent maniac. And it changes your physiology. It makes you into a werewolf. You become looking like a werewolf in the video game. Well, that sounds like bullcrap. Well, of course it's bullcrap. It's a fiction. It's a video game, okay? That's not the point. The point is that in the illustration of the video game, you can find aspects of reality. So in Resident Evil 8, you are fighting against a cult, just like in Resident Evil 4, but you're fighting against a cult that is dedicated to the cult leader named Mother Miranda. Mother Miranda was a scientist who discovered the mold, and she decides to do an experiment on the village, and she infects this entire village in Romania. Romania, you know who you are, Romania. She infects this whole village in Romania, and the village becomes a den of werewolves and blood-sucking vampires. Sounds like a film. Yeah, it does. But in this video game, you can see, in a way, a hyper-realistic illustration of the grimy, dark face of cults. The werewolves in Resident Evil 8, they tear people apart. They eat people. They massacre a village. It's really horrendous. And that's fiction. But in World War II, there was an SS unit literally composed of people from the Crazy House. I think it was called the SS Derelanger or something like that. This was an SS unit that was literally made up of crazy people from the crazy houses. The Nazis just went to the crazy house and said, okay, who wants to become a part of the SS? I do. So all these people with schizophrenia and bipolar and maybe split personality, they were walking around with uniforms and guns. And what do you think they did? They raped and they massacred villages in Belarus. And there is a film that, if you have not seen this movie, my God, you need to see this film. It's called Come and See. It is a masterpiece of Soviet film, and it is about what this SS unit of mentally ill people were doing in Belarus. And I don't want to spoil it too much, but there is a scene in this film that's very graphic, and it shows how this SS unit butchers an entire village, rapes and murders and burns people alive and all these things. And I could when you watch the film, the characters, the Nazis, the SS German officers, they are acting like complete zombies. They're full of rage. They're uncontrollable. They're filled with bloodlust. They are utterly sadistic, violent, and they have zero reason. They are completely, they completely ignore any semblance of morality. And they were zombies. So when I play Resident Evil, when I play Resident Evil 8, Resident Evil 4, or Resident Evil 5 for that matter, or even Resident Evil 7, which also kind of involved the cult, Resident Evil, also Resident Evil Revelations 2, in all these video games, I see these zombies who are all dedicated to their leader, and they are completely blank when it comes to morality, and they are utterly bent on slaughter, butchering, and death, and mayhem, and murder. And that's not really too far away from how evil humans act. It's not really far away at all from how cults function. In fact, the reality is much worse because it's reality. And so when I play these video games, I see really an artistic presentation of the ugliness of cults, the ugliness of humanity's continual pattern of partaking in indiscriminate obedience to evil. Anyway, those are my thoughts for tonight. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.
Tight till you opened the door and you showed me there, not alone. I believe in my heart's desire. I believe I can walk through fire. I know how very strong I am when I'm at my weakest. I believe I can overcome. to tell if I'm dreaming, but I can tell him we'll make